to the Scaling Japan podcast, a podcast about how to grow your business from $100,000 and beyond in the land of the rising sun.
Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Batino, and on today's episode, we have Mari Ono. Mari is an experienced consultant in digital transformation in the manufacturing industry. And as a consultant, she has more than 15 years of experience working with multiple stakeholders from the very beginning of the sales cycle to the end, and then actually delivering the service once the deal is finalized. She's worked for some very huge corporations, and she definitely knows what she's talking about. For today's episode, Mari is going to share an awesome framework to help guide your sales. And, in other episodes in our series on sales, we focus a lot on tips, understanding Japanese cultures, sometimes how decisions are made. And you can apply what you learned in the other episodes to this framework that Mari is providing us today. And that was a long introduction, but Mari, could you please introduce yourself?
Hello. Thanks for having me, Tyson. It's really nice to be here. As you mentioned, I've been working for some large organizations, and actually I work at a very small organization as well, where there were only about 10 members in the Tokyo office. So definitely regarding sales, I have quite a bit of experience. And today I thought it would be interesting to give you like a framework. There's no name for this framework. I found it and I've been using it and talking about it for quite a long time, actually. This idea is that we can split sales into roughly two categories. One is route sales and the other is account sales. What we're trying to talk about is the route sales is much more a sales where you have an out-of-box solution or offering or service that you want to sell. And you just need to approach the right person or the right organization to make the sale. So you would typically have a long list of accounts, maybe a phone number or maybe an email account, or maybe just to start to approach, and you would go down the list and you would start selling the product. On the other hand, the account sales is a sale where you would customize the solution or the offering or service to each of your accounts. In this case, you would probably have a reference from another customer or a friend or a partner company or a partner that you're working with, and you would typically try to understand what their needs or what they're interested in first, and then start to create their customized sales from there. Hope I got the overview across to you, but we can talk into a little bit more detail as we go along.
Thanks for sharing those two types. And just to clarify, if you have a product and kind of like based on your product, you should create your sales system. And in this case, I think you mentioned route sales is more like you kind of have like a cookie cutter product or service.
Yes.
And you try to sell that to the masses as opposed to maybe an account based where you feel out what they want, what they need, and you provide kind of a custom solution to that.
Yes, you would probably have something roughly that you're selling, but then you would definitely have to customize it when you're doing account sales.
Cool. No, thanks for explaining that. In my experience, I've kind of been on the other end of route sales because, with at least OneCoin English, we're a big company, but we don't have thousands of people. Like we have hundreds of people, not thousands. I've experienced where language school management systems, like people would contact the school and they'll try to sell us their school management systems, and other ones like test preparation software where you could take the TOEIC tests using their online system and it would give a score. We could do it several times a year, but they really just focus on this one service that they provide. And they already have the system built and there's not too much customization.
Yeah, I think regarding route sales, that is a typical case. And then I think that's a good example, like you were saying, because especially with OneCoin English, it's for me like fantastic in applying to this framework because it says from the name that what you're selling and what it says from the name, especially as a customer, what you're benefiting out of it. It's OneCoin, it's quick. It's definitely what you need. You don't want a full-blown academic structure of the whole English program. You know what you're getting, like even from the name. So I think that's a really good way of starting with a route sales.
Glad to clarify that. Yeah, in our cases too, sometimes like if businesses would approach, it's like, this is what we can offer, but anything outside of here, we can't really offer that. So that makes sense. That'll be more of a route sales method.
During route sales, I think it's important that you have a really good elevator pitch, actually. So if you have it really clarified and you know what you want to sell, it's quite easy for also the client to really understand how to explain it to other people as well. For example, if you're pitching to a large organization, even for the route sales, sometimes they would have to do decision-making process, especially in Japan, as ringi. So they involve multiple people anyway. And sometimes what route sales people would struggle is that they only can say the same pitch so that they don't really have any other way to explain it. But then on the other hand, you can also help the person from your customer saying like, okay, this is how you would phrase it, almost teaching your customer to be your sales member as well. So I think on the other hand, it's really good in working with your clients. So it's not just about saying the thing over and over again, but then you also can work with your client so that they can also say it in their words and sell it to have the approval to move forward with the sales.
And actually, I'm doing route sales myself now that I think about it. So for like my coaching service, I've been doing some code calling and I have a mind map flow of how the conversation should go. And if it's the foreign owner who picks up the phone, this is the flow. If it's a Japanese staff, this is how I explain it to them.
Very interesting. Did you have the idea of creating it in that way, like setting up your sales process in that way from the beginning, or how did that happen?
I would say after probably talking with maybe 5 or 10 of their Japanese staff picking up, I realized, I actually have to change my format on how to get past them. The question they would ask is, do they know you? And I would say, I think they do because I'm a famous owner.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a famous business owner in Japan. But at the beginning, I would be like, no, actually, they don't know me. So how do I deal with all these situations? But because I'm targeting 2 or 3 different industries, and I know their needs, I understand the stuff, I've created 3 scripts for each different industry. And if the owner versus the staff picks up,
Nice.
and it's kind of a cookie cutter, and I just offer this basic service.
Now, I think that's a very established, actually, a route sales model, because what a lot of people say, like, oh, it's almost like the infamous telemarketing approach. You get a call and they're trying to sell maybe a water cooler to you, and you don't know why they're calling. You don't know what, like why your phone number is on the list, and you just have a very bad image about route sales. But then, like in your case, you have a specific target. Even you change the scenario by who's picking up the phone, and that would definitely improve your rates about like how you're approaching the client and who you're talking with. So I think it's a really great way of route sales. I think a lot of people, again, just immediately think like, oh, we're not going to do route sales because it just has a very bad first impression. Everybody had that phase where they just get so many direct mail or the DMs. But a route sales, I think it's a powerful tool if you keep the right methods and keep the right KPIs. It's really good.
So I guess before we dive into account sales, I did want to add 2 points. One was because getting rejected, like I'm not used to being rejected. So I'm used to being like the leader of the company. So being rejected when I was doing code calls, like it made me feel like some existential level pain. And I was like, oh my God. So I had to do some self-reflection, and I did come to 2 conclusions. Mm-hmm. One was actually the pricing for my service is really, really good. So actually, I should not feel guilty about calling people because my service is actually really good. And I'm not sure if there's the best way to put it, but like, let's say they're very lucky to have this opportunity.
Yes.
And so that made it easier. And the other one is in my sales script, I tried to add some humor and to make it fun. And so it would make the calls more enjoyable. Like, how do you help companies? And if I talk to the Japanese staff, is like, does your company have any challenges? And they would mention it. It'd be like, yeah, I can help with that.
Yeah.
Or it's like, does your boss provide you one-on-one training? I could probably help your boss train you better.
Definitely. I really like those 2 points, actually. Those are really, really valuable, I think, especially because, again, in route sales, I said that it's important to get that elevator pitch, they get that pitch correct or like perfect almost. It's important to be perfect from the client eyes. So like you said, you know what you're selling. OneCoin English is obviously is a really good deal for the customer, or even your coaching service. It's a really good deal if you're getting coaching from you. In that case, it's really important to, from the client eyes, you would probably not get a better deal anywhere else regarding OneCoin English, definitely. Like if you're talking about budget, this is the thing that you really need. Also, the other part, because again, taking the example from a telemarketer, I think we all had that experience about having either a very bored telemarketer and also a very over enthusiastic telemarketer, where both of them actually don't have enough humor. So you can't really breathe when they're talking. They're just talking. You really have no expressions to respond to them because they probably just memorize the script and they're just going all full power. So I think for you to have that humor, or for others, I would say like just have a couple of questions that you can ask so that you can get a little bit of reaction, even if they're going to reject your offer, so that you can get some insights about where they're at and what they're thinking. And I think for you, humor is the best way to get that human connection as well, because what you're pitching is sometimes, again, route sales is very short and you need to get that additional interaction with the client.
In my case, I found that the reception staff enjoyed hearing about my stories of my company appearing on national television, because we appeared on like several of Matsuko Deluxe's programs.
Nice.
They always loved hearing those stories.
Yeah, I think, again, going back to route sales, and I think it goes also with how I would view sales, because although I'm presenting a framework that is route sales and account sales, which are completely two different things, but in the end, I think sales is connections and it's about relationships with people. To have that connection, and even with route sales, I think you also have the experience of having people coming back as a recurring customer. And in that sense, it's not a one-shot just route sales. Sometimes people do come back. Sometimes people can come back with friends, introduce you to other people. And in that sense, it's important for you to be able to create that connection. And like you said, you appearing in some TV shows, it's always really nice because not only your employees enjoy it, but then also your customers. And I can imagine additional customers saying like, oh, I know this guy. I've talked with him. And also probably talking with other clients as well, saying like, hey, do you know that guy that appeared on Matsuko Deluxe yesterday? Or, hey, here's a YouTube video that I know, or even this podcast, actually. So I think it's a fantastic thing.
Like what you're listening to and ready to scale your company? Let Tyson coach you and your team to make the jump. You can find more information about our coaching and advisory services at www.scalingyourcompany.com. Now, back to our podcast.
So next, let's move on to account sales. So I'm definitely going to have a lot of questions for you because this is a new area for me.
So account sales is, on the other hand, where you have a rough offering or a service that you can deliver, but you would cater or make sure that you apply it to the customer's needs and have a bespoke project sometimes. So this would differ from the route sales because you would discuss with the potential client, try to understand what their needs, and also discuss about what would be the best way to help them and how to meet their needs. The sales cycle is typically longer because you have that inquiry phase, which I call understanding and asking the questions about what the client needs. And then sometimes it would take a couple of times even to create the solution. So sometimes you would go back and say, okay, based on our conversation last time, I think like you need 3 services. For example, this is where we would create a roadmap. And then the second session, we would start working on, for example, your presentation skills or presentation speaking. And then the last part, we would need to work on your writing skills or, for example, like PowerPoint skills. And sometimes, so again, if you're selling a whole package deal about improving your sales team, then it would be sometimes like a 3 months long project. And then the client would say like, oh, that's too long. I had only 1 month of training period in mind. And then you would go back and say like, okay, no problem. Then let's make the original 3 months project that I had proposed a 1 month thing. And this would be on your budget, in your timeline, and how about this one? And normally the client would start to be much more involved, and also, but then they would approve with the proposal.
Oh, that was interesting. So like even just coming up with the solution can take 2 to 3 meetings or sometimes even more.
Yes, definitely. I think it's easier if you have a couple of ways, or again, this time I would also use the word framework again, but frameworks that you would normally work with. So what kind of training do you do, or what kind of services that you do? It would be easier if you can also phrase that into sometimes different sections. For example, if you're doing just the sales cycle consulting, so if you're just saying like, oh, I can help you work with your sales team, segment their customers and make sure what kind of communication that they're going to have, that would be one service. On the other hand, sometimes they would need, like you said, one-to-one coaching, and that would again be a different service that you're going to provide. And often companies would just tell you that, oh, we need to have a better system to run our sales team. We need something better. You would have to probe, and you would have to understand, are you having individual problems, or do you need a whole system that can run your sales team? Do you have issues regarding how you measure the team, or you do have issues retaining the people who are in your team? Obviously, what you're selling may not become too different, but often you would probably feel uncomfortable about selling something completely different where you have no knowledge or no expertise, and if you're not confident you can deliver. But then on the other hand, if you know where you're going and if you know what you can do, account sales can be very powerful, because the sales size, I would say, can be larger than the route sales, or in total. For example, if you're segmenting up services, so if you're saying to the client, oh, I cater to you, we're just going to do 1 month. But then because the client already knows that you can deliver a 3 months project, they would come back most likely to you and say like, hey, so we only did 1 month, but we actually really like you. So can you do the whole 3 months thing? Or can you do maybe like the 1 month project, but to other divisions or some new people? So then in total, as a sales, normally it would become bigger. That was a lot.
No, that was very good. As you're speaking, I was thinking like, oh wow, more revenue, more revenue, more sales. It could go from a simple project to a potentially expensive project,
Definitely,
but very
definitely.
in-depth, very quickly.
Definitely. And I think account sales, you just need to have a different mindset, because if you're talking with a client and the client sometimes just talks about completely something different from your area, you still take that as an input and you still say like, okay. And then sometimes I do use the term, okay, going back to my topic and why I'm here as a salesperson. Is there somebody else that I should approach? Now, you talked about something completely different, and I'm fascinated about your talk, but am I supposed to approach somebody different? Should I have approached, for example, the training segment, the department? I feel like I approached the sales department because you actually do sales and I'm supposed to train you. But it seems like your training team, your human resource team, has something better for me to discuss. So in having that first conversation with the sales manager might actually benefit, because if you go to the training team lead and you pitch, they would also probably hear from the sales manager saying that, oh, Tyson, yeah, it's that guy. I talked with him 2 weeks ago. And oh, so he did talk with the training manager. Oh, yeah, it would make sense. And so it would really benefit that you have those kind of conversation on the side. But then a lot of the people, if they're not mindful about doing the account sales, sometimes would just disregard the first sales manager meeting and say like, it was a waste of time. He didn't really seem interested at all. And he kept on talking about something completely different. So in that sense, I just think that it's useful to have this framework in the back of their mind. Also, it would probably be really good for your mental health as well.
No, it makes sense. For me, what came up is kind of the phrase, always be looking for opportunities. Or that's the biggest impression I got from listening to you.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And I think you've been doing that as well, right? I think even with the coaching programs or English programs.
My case, I've always been more of a cookie cutter approach, but for like my coaching, I've considered, do I want to actually do more advisory, like, like more custom, helping them build this whole system, as opposed to kind of doing it session by session. So I've considered it. So that's why listening to this, it's kind of interesting. If I were ever to go the corporate route, they would probably not want, let's take it on a month by month basis, but more of like a 3 to 6 month or even 1 year. Yeah, that was really interesting how you mentioned too, like where you would talk to one person in the organization, but you'd use that opportunity to really understand their organization structure and the decision making.
It's probably one of the things that you can't do if you have the route sales method or if you only work with the route sales way. So again, I'm just distinguishing these two methods of doing sales to gain a little bit more clarity. And also for me, it's helped to also communicate with my team. What's the objective of, for example, making cold calls or, for example, having these kind of meetings with a client? Because again, sometimes people only know one thing. So if I have a colleague that accompanied me again with the account sales method saying, and he would probably again say like, oh, we just wasted an hour. And until I explained to him how this can actually benefit us and how account sales work, he would probably not even think twice about the meeting. So yes, it's important for me sometimes to communicate with the team so that they also can understand how to leverage. And like you say, look for opportunities.
My guess would be account sales, like, the fiscal year, the timing, what month of the year plays a big factor. Would you say that's
Definitely.
correct? And
Definitely. I think especially in large corporates where budget is limited, it would definitely impact a lot in which timing that you're going to move or which timing you're going to set up a meeting. Sometimes, especially during the summertime, I would just set up a couple of meetings, but actually not be so aggressive about selling something. Sometimes I would just frankly say like, "Oh, but I want to see understand how your summer vacation was or how things were," because the autumn is normally the timeline in Japanese companies that they would start budgeting for the next fiscal year. So then it would always give me some insights about where is this manager thinking, what kind of timeline is he thinking about hiring new people next year, a lot of them, so that he needs a lot of training, or is he actually focused more on the latter half of the second year? Maybe he has additional budget and he hasn't used it up, so he's looking for another project that he can do. And also, right before the closing of the financial sector, so that is as financial year, that would normally be about February. What happens a lot is that companies sometimes have leftover budget that they want to use up until April. So in that case, I would sometimes go back and say, okay, how was your year? What are you going to report as a year end? And most likely they would start dropping me clues about saying like, we had a good year, but I think we could do a little bit more in the last 1 month or 1 month and a half. And I would say like, oh, so you want to meet? Should we do something else? And that would normally give me a couple of other clues so that I can make a pitch.
or at least when I do marketing, that's how I would
Yes.
approach it. Like, this is the plan, or these are the
Mhm.
points to push. But yeah, no, I could see the benefit of that in sales too. And I think one thing to clarify for the listeners is in a lot of Japanese corporations, the fiscal year is April to March. I think in the US, I think everyone is January to December, but I think in Japan, it's based on the company.
I forgot to mention that as well. Yes, definitely look up the fiscal year of the client, especially if it's a large organization and they have annual reports coming out. Definitely do that first. For me, in account sales, there's no shame of asking these kind of questions. So it's relationship building and it's looking out for opportunities constantly. So then if it's a medium-sized or a small organization and they don't really have a clear explanation about how their finance works, you can just casually ask like, well, am I correct that you work based on the calendar year or do you start from April? Since a lot of also Japanese companies do, for example, have a lot of new grads in April, you can just hint saying like, oh, so a new grad joined the company. How was your new start of the fiscal year? And sometimes they would just say like, oh no, our fiscal year starts in a different timing. And so we had newcomers, but it's not really related. And that would, again, give you some insights about how they work.
Thank you for sharing that. Do you have any other potential tips or maybe things to mention about account sales?
I think, again, just giving all these explanations is not to say route sales is bad or account sales is bad or anything like that. I just think that it's really important to figure out what works for your company or what works for you. This also probably goes with some of your sales members as well. Some people are happy to do route sales as long as they have like the pitch correctly and they can understand what they're selling and what's the strongest sales points. Again, some people are really happy to do these route sales, but then some people really struggle with route sales. In that case, you might want to consider doing account sales with them, or you might want to just have a discussion and say like, okay, do you want to shift over to account sales? Is this something that you've done or something that you think that it's interesting? Especially with account sales, you need to really understand the industry sometimes. You really need to understand the client sometimes. A lot of the times I would normally tell the account sales members to look up almost daily the news for information about the account. Sometimes they would have a press release coming out, and you definitely want to seize that opportunity and say like, oh, I saw the really nice press release the other day. Can I go and talk about a little bit more detail about what you're doing? It would be a good opportunity for you to create more relationships with the client.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess using those press releases as conversation starters or reasons to follow up.
Yes, it's also important because sometimes account sales, the decision timeline is much more longer than route sales. So you do need to constantly follow up and say like, okay, have you talked about like some of my projects? How are things?
That was a good point from your experience. Like, how long can account sales go in some cases?
I would actually say sometimes as long as 6 months or even longer. It depends on the client's situation. So I would also be careful with account sales because at a certain timeline, you have to also understand that they might just be using you as an information source. So, for example, you might be constantly explaining to them that there's, for example, new ways of learning English. There are some apps or there are some overseas tutors, etc. There's things that you can do online. They may just be really digging for information about in the world or using you also as somebody who listens to them and would pitch to them. Sometimes that does create a deal and they would call you because you've always been attentive for all the meetings and their requests, etc. But you also need to understand where to pull out of that situation because if they don't have the budget and if they're not really interested in paying you for a certain service, then it is time that you back out and you focus on another account. So because account sales, you can really only focus on so many accounts. Human minds have trouble handling more than 7 accounts. And this is just a figure of speech. So I don't think that it's solid number 7, but then I just use it as saying like, okay, which accounts are you focused on? Top 7 here. Okay. And number 2, I see that you've been going for quite a long time, but you're not really making headway to any of the discussions. Other ones, you can see that timeline saying like, oh, you closed a deal after 2 months. One seems taking such a long time. Then sometimes you just need to say that, okay, maybe it's time to focus on another account. It's not that you would abandon them. It's just that effort, for example, like following up on press releases, etc., might just be a little bit more or less.
Yeah, that rule of 7 sounds very interesting. I know it's not written in stone, but when I thought about it, it's like, yeah, if I had a team, how much projects can they focus on at once? Yeah, actually, 7 does sound like a pretty good number. Sometimes they might even be pushing it. I'll be pretty happy with that number.
I'm so glad. I think, yes, never really push things, but then I think 10 things is a little bit too much. Somewhere, I think somebody told me about number 7.
Yeah, that was a very awesome introduction to account versus route sales. We did a good job of covering it pretty comprehensively. So thank you for that. So I guess, yeah, since you've been graciously giving us your time to help us improve our sales, do you have any requests or is there any information you'd like to share with the audience?
I would introduce the lovely Facebook group that I'm joining. It's called Make March Matter. It's run by a lovely lady called Jennifer Shinkai, and she's been running it since the beginning of the pandemic. It's a great team and a great group for you to be in if you're also either working from home or if you've been impacted from the pandemic or if you're still recovering. We have Monday morning meetings and Friday evening catch up. If you're working alone or if you're working in a small business and trying to set up your week and figure out what the major wins are, then definitely share that in the Monday morning meeting. And then Friday evening, we can always share about what your wins were. Also on Wednesday on Facebook, we would normally have a segment where you could promote your business. So if you're running a small, medium business, it's always nice to write something about your business. And it's always also interesting because it's a small group. It's 400 people, but it's still small to compare to some groups. You can always edit and you can always improve your pitch. So you can always see like, oh, so if you write it in this way, I can get responses in this way. So it's always interesting to see other people improving their pitch or pitching their business in a different way. So I really encourage you to join and yes, have fun and make new connections with their community.
Yeah, I'm a member myself. There's a lot of great people in the group. It's a great place to meet other entrepreneurs. I think it's a good community to be a member of where people ask questions, you give answers and give each other feedback. And I think it can definitely help entrepreneurs to help grow their business. And I'll put a link to the Facebook group in the show notes. And I actually consider the person who runs it, Jennifer, she's one of my top 10 business people in Japan in terms of impact she's had on the community. But when you also talk to her one-on-one, she's a great person.
I totally agree. I would also encourage you to not only join the Meet group, but also get to know other members as well. And definitely Jennifer too.
Thank you so much, Mari.
No problem. Thank you for having me. And everybody, happy sales.